Welcome to Real Talk, where I give real answers to real questions from real worship leaders. If you are a real worship leader with a real question and you want a real answer, head right here and submit your question for a future episode. Got some good questions this week? Let's talk about it. Should I hire musicians to fill in roles on the band? John. No. So, I am an alto, maybe was a mezzo-soprano. No, I'm just kidding. I won't go on to the next question. But my short answer is no. I don't think that we need to hire people to fill in spots on the band. I just think I've got to ask the question to people who do that, because I'm sure some people who watch this channel do that. Why? What are you trying to accomplish that must be accomplished by having a bass player? What are you trying to accomplish that must be accomplished by having a drummer? Really, I'm open to hearing people's thoughts on this, because I see no circumstance where I am going to hire somebody to play music in my church and play on my team, because this is what I feel like that communicates. And I mean, if you have to do that, you're probably leading in a small church, right? So I think what we subtly communicate when we think that way, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I'm not saying that everybody's actively thinking this way, but I think the thought process behind that is, I see all of these bigger churches, and they have amazing worship teams, and they have 16 guitarists on their team, and every Sunday they've got this full band, and full bands equate to better worship. I've heard this not just in this conversation, but in a lot of conversations, like when people want to find more members for their worship team, which I think you should be doing. I just don't think we need to look outside of the church to do that, and we certainly don't need to pay somebody to do that. But I think the subtle, and maybe even not so subtle, implication is, if I have a full band, our church's worship will be better. Why? Because worship is music, and worship is the quality of the music. And therefore, if we have a greater quality of music, then the quality of our worship will be better. When in actuality, worship is the treasuring of God in our hearts above all other things that overflows into external acts of glorification. So if you need a specific instrumentation to improve or enhance your worship in a way that will allow you to worship in a way that you cannot if you do not have that instrumentation, then you are relying on external means to facilitate your worship. Things outside of you, as opposed to, no, I need to treasure God in my heart more and then worship Him from that place. I hope that makes sense, but I feel like that's what's subtly communicated here, whether it's hiring musicians or whether it's just growing our worship team, because a lot of worship team leaders want to do this on a budget, and a lot of worship team leaders don't have money to go hire someone. So what do? Well, they go outside of the church, still looking outside of the church, and they just try to go to the highways and byways and bring in anybody that they can find, which is a biblical example of salvation. It's a biblical picture of salvation, but it is not a biblical picture of worship team recruitment, because when you put somebody on stage in front of your church, people view them as a leader. And I'm not just bringing some random guy off of the street to play drums and appear as a leader in my church just because I need a drummer. So I will not hire a band member because I'm not leading a band. I'm not leading just music. I'm leading a worship team that consists of believers in my church to facilitate the gathering of other believers, pointing them to the worthiness of God and providing them with the opportunity to respond. Not just to play drums, not just to play bass, not just to play keyboard, to lead worship. And so, it's not just should we hire somebody. I don't even go outside of my church to look for free musicians to play with my team. My expectations are that you've been coming to church for 6 months and this varies sometimes, maybe it's 3 to 6 months, depending on, like we've had this before, there's other churches within our denomination that are in the town where I live. And if somebody comes from one of those churches and like we already have a relationship with them, then I might let them on the team like 3 months or something. And so it's on a case-by-case basis. But the point is, you've got to be a part of the church in order to serve, especially on a Sunday morning, in a leadership role. And so I want people who are part of my church to do that. And I want them to be a believer for sure. So not only am I not going to hire a musician, but I'm definitely not going to hire an unbeliever to come and play with my worship team. And I guess another reason that I think about this is because it just brings up so many leadership struggles. I was going to say problems, but that makes it sound like a problem with the leadership, and it's not a problem with the leadership. It's that we can't hold these people to expectations in a biblical way. When you join a church, whatever that means, whether it's church membership or whatever language you use at your church, but whatever it means to be part of a church, you are joining a covenant community of believers who have covenanted together to say, this is what we believe about God and the God that we worship, and so we are going to hold ourselves to these specific standards. And if you have somebody outside of the covenant community come in and join your worship team, not only are they not being held to those same standards because they haven't joined the covenant community. I know that this is a lot of covenantal language, but I think it is important that we realize that when we join a church, it's not just this random gathering of believers, but really when you join a church, you are saying, I am committing to this body of believers. We don't have to agree on every single minutia, but churches have a statement. I think a lot of people don't realize this. Churches have a statement of faith because they are stating what they believe and how they're going to function. And this is kind of a side tangent, but I've noticed this a lot recently, is people will come into a church and the church statement of faith will be very clear, and they'll come into it with different beliefs, and then they'll try to act with those different beliefs in mind when they're the ones who came into the church that made it very clear that they have a statement of faith that specifically spells out specific doctrine. When you are joining a church, a body of believers, you are committing to maybe not agreeing, once again, on every small point, but you are committing to agreeing with the doctrine that is laid out. This is how we interpret the Bible, so we are going to act in this way. We are going to teach specific things because this is what we believe that the Bible teaches. And my point in that was that when you bring somebody in from the outside, they aren't under that commitment, and we can't hold them to the same standards, and it's only going to cause problems in your worship team when you do that. So, no, you don't need to hire musicians for your band. If you have an acoustic guitar and you can sing, you've got enough to lead worship. If you've got a keyboard and you can sing, you've got enough to lead worship. If you can only sing and you have to use backing tracks, you've got enough to lead worship. Yep, I mean, somebody in your church is gifted at least in that minimum way. We build from there, and as God, I always say this when it comes to worship team growth. Your worship team size will be proportionate to the size of your church. So if you're only serving in a church of 25 people and you're the only person there who can lead worship, serve faithfully. And as the church does the work of missions, what is the purpose of missions? You know, the ultimate goal of the church is not just missions. The ultimate goal of the church is to create worshipers of God. And we do that by sharing the gospel with people and God regenerating them so that they will actually want to worship him. So the primary work of the church is to create worshipers, and the mission of how we do that is by sharing the gospel. So as we fulfill our mission, the mission that Christ has given us, the Great Commission, other worshipers come into the family of God. God turns them into worshipers, regenerating their hearts, causing them to want him and to worship him. And then 15 to 20% of them statistically will be musicians who can help lead worship in your church? I am an alto. Maybe I was a mezzo-soprano some years ago. I have for most of the time, since I became a Christian, been the lead voice or a soloist at the church where I came from. Now, 25 years at this church, I'm singing and loving it. But the thing is that I realized that many songs are originally arranged to be sung in higher keys. I many times feel frustrated because if I'm singing with the team and leading a song, I do want it to be right in my sweet spot. But I was told that we don't do that for anyone. This band does not have the ability or experience to switch on the spot to another key during our practice. They come ready to practice with the key in which it will be played. And these answers just break my heart since I am so passionate about singing and sharing with the congregation what the songs bring in each of their messages. So, how do I look at this? How do I still have joy, serve the Lord even when I can't do it exactly with all the potential He's given me? Or should I be honest and open about it and express my concern and frustration? Thanks so much for your question, Amy. I always think of like the Dave Ramsey show when somebody calls in and he like has to make a decision in the moment. Like, has this person heard of the baby steps before? If they've heard of the baby steps before to get out of debt and they know what I teach, then I'm going to be super hard on them, and I'm going to be firm and tell them exactly how it is. Now, if somebody's new to the show and they don't call in and say, hey, Dave, long-time listener, first-time caller, and they're like, and now I just started listening to you last week, then he's much more gentle with them. So I want to be gentle with you, Amy, because I talk about this a lot on my channel, and I have strong opinions about it, and so I want to be as graceful as possible, because a lot of what you're saying, when I've talked about it in the past on my channel, I pretty much like completely disagree with everything that you're saying, and I want to graciously explain why. The purpose of our congregational gathering, when we gather with our church, is not for one person to be up on stage sharing their gifts with other people where it's like, that person sounded so good today. It was so beautiful. That was a good service. Amy really sounded good today. That's not the purpose of our corporate gatherings. The purpose of our corporate gatherings is to worship God together. Colossians 3:16 says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, with thankfulness in our hearts to God. That is the goal of when we sing together as a church. We are singing together. So, yes, we want to be musically excellent when we lead, but we don't want our musical ability to step on the toes of the participation of the people in our church. When you lead your church, you aren't just singing in front of them. You aren't just singing a solo. You are leading people in worship. We want to be excellent when we do that, but we cannot allow excellence, defined as me sounding as good as I possibly can, to get in the way of people singing along with us. So that's why we can't just put songs in the keys that are best for us, because we want people to be able to sing along. So I hope I said that as graciously as possible. That's what I teach here on this channel all the time. That is what I've found most helpful in my own worship ministry. And I think that it is the biblical example of corporate worship, where we worship together, and it's not just people listening to people singing on the stage. Now, to answer your specific question, there are a few things that I want to point out that I think might be helpful for you. First of all, I said that I believe that everybody should be singing together at least the majority of the time. I'm not personally a big fan of special music. I think a case could be made for it every once in a while, that maybe you have special music. I just don't use it at my church, but it is not the normative way that we use music in the church. The normative way, I believe, is that we sing together. Therefore, we have to ask the question not, what key should this song be in for me, but what key is best for the people in my congregation to sing along with. And the best key for your church to sing along with is a key that puts the range of the song, at least the majority of the melody. The tessitura is the technical name. That is like the average of where the melody falls. We want that to be somewhere between a high C and a low C. I think that's C5 and C4 on a piano. I'm not a piano player, so I'm not 100% sure about that, but I know on guitar, it's between the 3rd fret on the A string, which is a C note, and the 5th fret on the G string, which is a C note as well. If we can keep the melody in between there, as a general rule of thumb, I'm not saying that this works every time and that we can never stretch the limits, but we want the majority of the song to lie between those two notes on the upper end and the lower end, because the majority of vocal types have a C to C in their range, even if it's not the C to C that I just talked about. They either sing up an octave or down an octave, depending on if they're male or female. So with that rule in mind, think about that with the songs that you're leading. And then you can ask your worship team member about that. And it's not, hey, I need these songs in a key that I sound the best in. It's, I need these songs, I think we should put these songs in a key that allows the most people in our congregation to sing. And I'm not really sure how you have that conversation if you're just a worship team member, because I don't even know if that's a worship team member decision. Like, it's your worship team leader's job to pick the keys for the song. I think that you can, though, and I'll get to this part now, I think that you can have some input on that. Maybe your band, like you said, doesn't have the ability to switch right on the spot. But if you've said it like 5 times and you're like, I can't, here's how I want you to rephrase it to your worship team leader. Not, I don't sound as good as possible in this key, but I can't sing in this key. If that's true, if you can't hit, if the songs are too high, like you said, check them. If they're like going up to an E constantly, an E above middle C, if they're going above that, then I think it's appropriate to say, I can't sing in that key. And then they don't have to change it on the spot, the key on the spot, but the next time you lead it, they should be prepared to lead it in a different key. I allow the vocalists on my team to give their input on the keys of songs if they're leading it. If somebody's singing and they're like, this is a little bit too high for me, then I have no problem bringing it down. I want them to be able to sing it. My goal just isn't to make them sound as good as possible. That's not the goal. The goal is for everybody in the congregation to be able to sing along. And so I still keep that in mind whenever we're leading the song. We're going from C to C. And if it gets like far outside of that, then I would have a talk with the vocalist and say, listen, this is the key that we need to sing it in, because this is the key that is going to allow the most people in our congregation to join with us in worship. So how do you still have joy in that? Serving the Lord even when I can't do it exactly with all the potential He's given me. You realize that your joy and your potential is not limited to musicality. It is founded in spiritual leadership of your church, in leading them in spiritual things. And you can sound as good as you could possibly sound, and if nobody ever sings along with you because the song is too low, I guess in your case, I don't know, whatever the problem is, then you haven't done your job. And you haven't led with excellence, because leading with excellence doesn't just mean sounding good musically. It means leading your church spiritually, pointing them to the worthiness of God, and providing them with the opportunity to respond. Putting your songs in a singable key for your congregation is one way to improve your worship leading, but there are also 5 other things that you can do that are super simple to help improve your worship leading, and that's why I put together the 5 tips to instantly improve your worship leading audio training. If you want to check that out, I'll link it down in the description below. It's just 5 simple things that you can do this Sunday that will instantly improve your worship leading. They aren't hard to do. You just have to make the conscious effort to do them, and you will be a better worship leader this Sunday. So check that out down in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.